The date of June 20, 1944, which was entitled The First Battle of the Philippine Sea, is the day that most of the pilots in the fleet will remember all of their lives. The day started in a flurry of excitement. It was now known that the Japanese fleet was in the Philippine Sea en route to Japan, but nobody said where they were. So the long-range scout planes were launched to find the Japanese fleet, and by noon the scout planes were still looking for the Japanese fleet. Searching the air group, the air groups were called to the ready rooms and to await some word from the scouts. The various squadrons were busy deciding which of their divisions would be assigned to make the attack. The aircraft were spotted on the flight deck, and plane handlers were repeatedly warming up the engines and topping off the fuel tanks. That was been a fun job, I guess. Word finally came a little after 4 p.m. in the afternoon that the Japanese fleet was located 300 miles from where our carrier was sitting. Everyone was concentrating on fuel consumption and for the fuel consumption for the round trip. And Admiral Mitchter was advised that the planes could marginally, they could make it, but it would be tight. And you can remember that the Admiral says, launch them. And at 4:21, pilots rushed to their assigned aircraft as the carrier was turning into the wind in preparation to launching the planes. As the launch was in progress, word came to us that the target fleet position had been corrected, and we added another 60 miles to that 300. More miles to an already long maximum distance flight. Bombing Squadron 2 had assigned 2 divisions to the strike. Squadron Commander Division would lead 8 planes. That's 2 more than normal. And Lieutenant Buell's division would lead 6 planes, which would be the standard. Bombing Squadron 2 would have 14 planes on the target. The ready room instructions eliminated the usual division rendezvous around the launch, but division were instructed to proceed toward the target in a loose running formation with fuel settings and engine RPM set to conserve fuel as much as possible. After a long, slow flight, the Japanese fleet was in sight, and we were greeted by a display of anti-aircraft fire that would make even the best 4th of July fireworks seem kind of skimpy. The bursts of anti-aircraft fire were in multiple colors. There was red, there was yellow, black, pink, blue, white, with the phosphorus streamers. And Commander Arnold, who was the commander of the entire air group, and had been directing the attack from the air, ordered all of the dive bombers to attack the carrier Ziokaku. We had arrived at the target area at approximately 6 p.m. It was almost dusk on the water, but up where we were at 14,000 feet, it was a nice, bright, sunshiny day. And at 6:40 p.m., Lieutenant Buell's division was the first to dive on the Ziokaku, with his 6 planes, followed immediately by the commander's 8 planes. And as we pushed over in a speed glide to 12,000 feet, to begin our dive bombing run, I was still tail end Charlie. Again, and in previous attacks, I closed the cockpit canopy, reduced the brake settings, and increased the throttle. And we were on our way to drop a 1,000-pound bomb on enemy carrier Ziokaku. And my rear seat gunner was hanging on for dear life as our airspeed improved, increased, because he's sitting in an open cockpit back there. My cockpit was closed. As soon as the bomb was released, the sequence of events was to close the bomb bay doors, close the speed brakes, check with Frenchie to see if the bomb hit anything. And he said, I think so, looked like midship about near the island. The division leader following our drop confirmed that the bomb was a hit, and from there on it was a matter of getting away from the Ziokaku and all the ships in its screen. In pulling out of the dive, I was glad that the bomb release was a bit high, because at that speed there was only one way to go, and that's straight forward. You don't do a lot of turning with that much speed. And it was over the bow of a cruiser, and it wasn't one of ours. So they were firing their 5-inch rifles, trying to hit airplanes going past them, so that's kind of strange, but they were trying anyway. I have no idea how many G's I pulled before getting on the level, straight and level, at about 100 feet over the water. The SB-2C's wings took the punishment, fortunately. This excess speed allowed us to climb to 7,500 feet with altitude without exhausting any extra fuel. We now had a little less than a half a tank that we had left what fuel that we had in the tank when we left on the launch. Pre-launch instructions were to proceed on individual basis after the attack in the direction that the fleet stated to the state's stated recovery point. So there we are at 7,500 feet altitude. The night was the blackest and darkest that I've ever seen. No moon, only starlight, and the sea was pretty calm. All we had to do was fly in the general direction of where the carriers were to be, and we should be able to pick up the homing device when we get within 60 to 75 miles of the carrier. With this details in mind, I worked on slowly getting the engine RPM settled down to the point where we're not wasting any fuel. And we took a heading for the position where we expected the carriers to be. And to save the fuel, slowly losing a little altitude will help maintain our airspeed. So we saw very few other planes moving in our direction. Then at about 8 o'clock, we sighted a plane crossing the direction that we were headed, and it was moving pretty fast and leaving the impression that it had a carrier in sight. We followed his lead and soon saw the red truck lights marking the end of the deck. The plane that we were following was making a long, strong, drawn-out approach to a landing, and seeing this, we decided that we would fly to the bow instead of wait for him to get to a landing. We'd fly up to the bow and take a make a new landing pattern, set up a new pattern. And as we reached the bow, our friend in his final approach landed hard on the deck, and having forgotten to safety his aircraft's guns, we found ourselves in the middle of a shower of tracers. Fortunately, none of them found us. But following this scare, we continued our approach to landing. The signal officer picked us up, and as we turned into the final approach, and with a few adjustments he gave me, the cut signal to land, and it was as smooth a landing as could be considered, in that this was my first night carrier landing. And the signal officer that brought me in my 2C, SB-2C, thought he was landing an F-4U Corsair. So that's kind of a strange combination, but it worked anyway. After landing, a deck handler led our plane forward to the bow on the flight deck to park it. My fuel gauge didn't wiggle even. It was dead empty. After parking the plane, he realized that this was an SB-2C. And in a very loud voice, he said, "This is the USS Enterprise, and we can't handle an SB-2C on this aircraft carrier." Well, I had only one response for him. I said, "Shove it over the side if you think that's necessary." But we're not leaving tonight. So by this time, another sailor had arrived to show Frenchie and I to the ready rooms, where we were offered a shot of brandy to help settle us down. Our search for the fleet put our landing aboard the Enterprise at a little after 8 p.m., and we were already in the ready room before Admiral Mitscher issued the order to turn on the lights. And if you're familiar at all with this era of the World War II, that was an unheard of thing, because that put the whole of the fleet that was following at risk with two submarines. But anyway, Admiral Mitscher issued the order to turn on the lights. The searchlights shone skyward to help the lost pilots find the carriers, and the flight deck lights blinked to outline the decks. It wasn't long before all hell broke loose, because air discipline failed as pilots. Their fuel all but gone, disregarded signal officers, as well as all their planes that were on their final approach to landing, and sometimes crashed on deck, creating a foul deck that prevented anybody from landing. By morning,